Hey there, welcome to episode 57 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. It is 10:28 a.m. on Wednesday, December 11, 2024. Today's episode, Imaging Technology, is some stories from my career path, which happened to wander in and out of exactly that, imaging technologies. Still images, moving images, that is video, display technology, capture technology, the works. It's been an interesting thing to consider, and every once in a while I think about this, and I'll refer to this later, but I have been known to say from time to time, in particular if I ever communicate with people from that general area of my background, just how shocking it is to recall how much work we had to do back then to do a fraction of the image capturing and display that is possible in your pocket right now, almost certainly. So the Quaggling Sand audio program is basically wandering down memory lane in probably back distant or distal or proximal memories on memory lane. Can't really go forward yet, but I try not to do too much of the when I was in college, but every once in a while. The name Quaggling Sand, in case you're curious, if you've never listened to this program before, comes from a term, quaggling sand, that I coined when I was very young. You probably know it better as pins and needles. Oh, that is production by a street in the morning. You probably know it as pins and needles, that feeling when you've been sitting on your foot or laying on your arm perhaps, leaning on your hand or whatever the case may be, circulation reduced, and as it returns, that tingling, sometimes unbearable sensation, of course, quaggling sand. That's what that would be. Hopefully, wherever you've located this audio program, you are able to locate further the episode description, which contains the show notes. I will read to you the summary. Then there are several relevant links, none of them required reading, except for the first two, of course. But they may be interesting. They're somewhat, and they're a fraction of what you could click through to and consume. And if you do want to, then there are links within links. They're all Wikipedia pages, because Wikipedia is always asking for money, so I may as well send traffic their way. On that note, the summary of today's episode sounds something like this. You can read it directly, or you can listen to me now. Modern technology is amazing, is it not? This is always true so far, such that what we have today seems to be so far beyond the imagination we may have had basically yesterday, or a decade ago, or whenever, that we cannot possibly imagine what will come tomorrow or a decade from now. I almost don't want to, because who knows? Who knows what people are working on now? 3D displays didn't really catch on, but head-mounted virtual reality, augmented reality display devices, will they replace phones? Will your Ray-Ban Meta eyewear take over? Who knows? The links for today's program, the first two being the shameless self-promotion links that if you've heard the program before, you are very familiar. buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, and Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. You do not have to spend any money, by the way. I use these as a way to promote my various audio programs and other projects using tools that are commonly used by open source developers and people doing creative works who want to enable community support of their activities. You can easily share the links. You can flip through the content. The buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile page has links to my various audio programs, GitHub projects, some other background details, and you will find right at the top a link to a recently added feature, what I call Buy Me an Update. It's playing on the name Buy Me a Coffee. It is a weekly micro update. They seem to be about 4 minutes, maybe under 5 minutes, audio. And then I'm posting on ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo about, it's almost like it's almost like a microblog site. How about that? We'll avoid the brand name. You can visit either. You don't have to spend any money on either. However, if you do choose to, if there is any sort of financial backing flowing through either or both of these sites, all funds through here do go towards coffee, purchase of beans, accessories, consumable supplies, etc. But again, no obligation, just a convenient way to have a one-stop shop for links and updates and whatnot. It's common across all of my projects, although I never mention it in the Innovate for Vegas Foundation because that is a charitable endeavor. It's not about me. But you can find all that out through the profile page on buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. And then on to the other links. Again, all Wikipedia. We have RAID, R-A-I-D. No, not the insect chemical weapon. It is a redundant array of inexpensive drives. There are variations on that, but that's basically what it is. Back in the old days, if you wanted to be able to capture really fast data, like real-time images from a television, you really could get stuck if you wanted to go full size. You get stuck trying to capture these images with what's called drop frame. So drop frames. You can drop one or many frames. It's when your hard drive can't catch the data quick enough, so your computer says, oh, okay, well, just forget this one and move on to the next one. And that will show up in your, when you play it back, it'll show up as a jittering or sometimes tearing. So when you can't get the data to flow and land on the hard drive at the same rate it's coming in, it's got to go somewhere. So drop frame used to be a big problem. Now I don't even know if people even talk about it anymore, but it used to be a problem. So RAID striping, RAID 0, spreading your data across multiple drives was one way to try to mitigate that. I'll talk about that more later. MJPEG, which is another thing probably nobody talks about anymore, motion JPEG, back in the day. I did not include it here because if you want, you can dive into this more deeply. The history of intra-frame video compression started in like 1929. I was sort of amazed by this when I was reading through it, but I don't know if you're going to be that interested. But MJPEG is intra-frame. It is literally like, what JPEG is. People still use JPEG today, the joint photographic, I think it is, expert group. Compressed images using the discrete cosine transform, very cool. So, by the way, if you are familiar with JPEG, you know that sometimes images can get very blocky. It's when you have what's called a low Q factor, quality. So if you reduce the quality of the image, you can increase the compression, but you lose some of the original image resolution. You get a blocky image. This will happen particularly around text that you have in an image. That's why they tell you to use PNG instead. But anyway, JPEG, when you apply it to moving images, what you basically do is every frame of your video gets compressed as a single image, and that's it. So if you have 1,000 frames of video, you have 1,000 JPEG images that are threaded together into a little video. And probably with a AVI container or a WMV, something like this. So Wikipedia has a nice little rundown on motion JPEG if you're curious. But somewhere in there, the Moving Picture Experts group, or Motion Picture Experts group, was working on interframe compression. Wait, did I say? I think I might have confused these earlier. Motion JPEG is intraframe. Motion MPEG is interframe. So motion JPEG intraframe compresses the data in one frame. MPEG interframe compresses data between frames, keyframes, iframes, and all. It's been a while. Motion pictures, because you have scenes and you have consistency across multiple frames, it makes sense then, and of course they were thinking about this in the 30s, to say, okay, can we compress things that were in the initial frame and then the next frame and the next frame? So there are different ways to render things that are coming into frame or leaving the frame. So one frame before, one frame after, and then you'll have a full frame when you do a scene change, for example, or so when there's no data in common, when you do a cut, or so there are certain conditions where you'll just have an original intra-frame compressed single frame. And then the frames that follow could be interframe compressed based on that first frame. And so every once in a while you'll have these, I think they're called iframes. It's been so long. It's iframes, keyframes. There are other types of frames. The whole goal being to be able to reconstruct this moving image, this collection of images that portray motion, using compression of common elements between the frames. So you get this interframe compression that will drastically reduce the size of the image without a commensurate reduction in quality. And over the years, there's in this history, I don't know if I'm not going to include it, but if you want to search for it, you can look at the history of interframe video compression. I don't even know if I still have the tab open. Oh, I do. All right, I'll paste it in there. I'll put it at the end of the links. So I'm doing that now. History of interframe video compression. It's at api.video. It's actually just video compression. Interframe is mentioned in there, but history of video compression. Anyway, so motion JPEG is what we were using at True Vision when I was working there. MPEG 2, I think it was becoming viable with some hardware, which I will describe very briefly later in this episode. There are so many formats, by the way. If you look on this Wikipedia page, a comparison of video container formats, there is always a degree of confusion, even by me. What do I know? When you are working with a file, a container, you may have an AVI file. You may have a WMV, Windows Media Video. Is that what it is? You may have a MPG. You may have an M4V. You may have there are many. If you have a .jpeg, JPEG, or a .jpg, you probably have a JFIF container with JPEG compressed data. So there's the container format, and then there's the inner content format. Is it a GIF? Is it a JPEG? Is it a raw image, etc.? JPEG 2000. So it's probably contained in a JFIF container, but they just put JPEG on the end. QuickTime Video was infamous for this. QuickTime Video content from Apple would have a bunch of chunks. I think they were called chunks of information. So you could have audio and video, and they would spread it through the file so that as you were streaming the file in off disk, you would have some basic alignment between the video and the audio. Audio has been easy forever. Audio data rates are really, 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 really low by comparison. So you could have the audio come in a streaming type structure, I suppose, or I think you could read it in all at once. So you could keep it in memory, and then you can synchronize the audio with the video and all that. So the video itself could be compressed with any number of codecs, compressor, decompressor. Same with audio. So video, it might have been motion JPEG, and then later you'd be working with some form of MPEG, MPEG 2, whatever, H260, what is it now? It's I'm totally spacing on the current codecs are A264, X264, one of those. So these codecs describe how you compress and decompress your content, whatever it is. So in the case of streams of frames of image data, which is all video is, it could be anything. So the container contains the file you have. The container contains whatever the codec content is. And it was an interesting time when I was working at True Vision, which I will talk about later. Very educational, but it is amazing what was happening back in the old days before we have the technologies we have today, just to capture what everybody was watching on television back in the analog cathode ray tube days. So yeah, so many formats. I do have a Wikipedia link for a comparison of video container formats, and it runs through a lot of what I just said, with tables of different container types and then data formats that are contained in the containers, in case you're curious. I have a so that's the video container formats. And then analog video, which is where I came into all this, I have a Wikipedia page, the timeline of video formats. So if, today everybody's got their 4K video because everybody wasn't happy with high def 1920 by 1080, which is of course outlandish by comparison to what we were working with back in the day when you were lucky to get 160 by 120, or if we were really, really, really lucky, you could get a nice no drop frame capture of 640 by 480, which is just slightly under the target analog number of scan lines for NTSC video. That's North American standard video used by pretty much North America, the United States, and so on. A lot of the world uses either SICAM, which is a French standard, or PAL, which is like a European standard. But, now the world doesn't have to worry about such things. So used, past tense would be more appropriate. But analog video is very, very tricky because for a variety of reasons. There was always a potential for noise. There was always a potential for an analog drop frame if there was sufficient noise and you lost sync or something. There had to be little tricks to enable a resynchronization if you lost your timings. So there was always an opportunity to resynchronize with the. I remember VESA timings. No, I don't. But the front porch, back porch, the refresh, the offsets and all that to, just so this is when you're digitizing frame data. But frame data is moving into your television back then in real time, picking it up from the sky or later from cable television. And the joy was getting those pixels on a screen with a cathode ray tube, an electron beam shooting at phosphors and lighting them up. Amazing. And of course, you had to broadcast the black and white and the color, so the chrominance and the luminance. Sorry, the luminance and the chrominance, really, in that order. So that the older so-called black and white televisions could still display images. So the luminance would be sent and the chrominance, and then you'd add those together. I believe it's C plus Y, or is it Y plus C? I think it's C plus Y. YUV color standards, later RGB, all this stuff. So many things to know. And then, of course, the history of video compression, as I mentioned, at api.video. It's a blog entry from who knows when. It starts in 1929 when video compression, I honestly didn't even know it went back that far. But then Silicon Valley started in the late 1800s, so the giants are taller than we thought, on whose shoulders we all stand. By the way, the reason I'm talking about this today is because, again, I'm always amazed when I think about the stuff that we were doing back then when I was working at a couple of different places in Silicon Valley and where we are today. It just boggles the mind. So we had the very beginnings of the early stuff when it comes to any form of digital image capture when I was in college in the early 90s. We had a digital slide printer called a montage printer that could project one slide at a time onto an actual piece of film, a roll of film, to be processed with chemicals into mounted slides for display by a light bulb into a screen. That was pretty cutting edge. This was like 1990. Somewhere in there, we gained access to a grayscale scanner. That was crazy. This was great for scanning in documents, which is probably what it was for mostly. But when it came to color images, the challenge was simple. Scan an image with color gels and get the different color channels that we could then recombine on a computer using something like Photoshop, which we did have access to, which was convenient. Easy piece of cake, except we didn't quite understand color spaces and color profiles and the differences between RGB and CMYK initially, though we were all smart people, so we would learn some of this along the way. Success was elusive, however, in creating anything that looked like the original in this digital form, and then not to mention printing it out somehow. Guess what? Printing it with the montage printer was a possibility, and then you would expose the resulting slide, which you would probably have to make a negative of. These were positive slides. So make a negative, project that onto some photographic paper, and end up with a photo, kind of like a color photocopier, which I would work near, I didn't work on directly, when I would eventually work at Supermac, my first job out of college. However, the possibilities of capturing actual video, likely from a classic handheld video camera, which was recording to tape, whether VHS or something more exotic, were in the future. I have a feeling some of my media studio colleagues when I was in college had access to some sort of usable devices back then, but nowhere near as useful as would come only about 3 years later. So whatever they had then, 3 years later was probably 10 times more advanced, in case you didn't catch that. So eventually I would enter the workforce in Silicon Valley. My first job was at Supermac Technologies, a company that specialized in digital imaging workflow hardware, like color profiled and thus color accurate displays, profile matched. Not that color profiling makes them color accurate, but that's part of the workflow. Profile matched dye sublimation printing and color profilable graphic cards, not to mention viewing booths that were color neutral. They were basically like gray, except not just any gray. And then if you mix that with ambient lighting and a hood over the display, ambient lighting of a known color temperature, you would end up with a pre-press environment where you could view images that were color accurate according to your color profiles that you would match from the input device, from your source material, from your display, through your graphics card, your entire processing pipeline, eventually reaching a color accurate printer. So you could get a pre-press view before you sent it off to a big giant print job to appear in magazines and wherever else. So you were able to get color accurate representations of your output. This was important because around that time, fun fact, bonus, the number one reason for returns of purchases from catalogs and advertisements of that ilk, number one reason given. Survey says, ding, color didn't match the photo. These socks are not the same color lavender as in this picture. So the lack of accurate color matching was actually a business issue for anyone selling things online where color could be a factor. I don't know if they took that same survey for things that didn't have a color factor, like this coffee didn't match the color. I don't know if that was an issue. But when you're coming down to like clothing or furniture, anything where color was an important detail. My first access to real commercial quality video capture was when I was at True Vision, which was in around 1996, where they were focused entirely on motion JPEG image capture and rendering from analog cameras or Betacam tape sources. So Betacam is the big 3/4 inch, the stuff you would see in like TV news stations and whatnot, tape sources, and back to tape. And of course, capturing to the hard disk in between. I missed the word to. Capturing to the hard disk. So while you're digitizing this analog input from a camera or possibly from a Betacam video deck, you would probably want to save it off the disk so you could edit it or do what you may. So this was Betacam decks were sort of weird. They were not something you would ever see day to day unless you saw one in a movie or if you happened to visit a newsroom or worked in a newsroom. They were not for the casual user. They were not Betamax, the failed video format, the one that lost out to the vastly inferior VHS tape format. But the Betacam, that was some high-end stuff, and super high quality imagery frame. You could jog to a particular frame. You could go back one frame, forward one frame. You couldn't really do that on VHS. So it's really beyond the familiarity of a normal person from that time period. What can I say? They were by comparison. Oh wow, it's pretty cool. So that was my first time playing with this. Remember in college, we're trying to scan color images with a black and white scanner. So this was crazy. And we had access to video cameras because we had to try all this stuff out and make sure it worked. Video cameras that were doing overscan, NTSC overscan, so 720 by 480. PAL cameras, which I don't remember the resolution for. If only there were a Wikipedia link I could refer you to. So we supported all the formats and the overscan and all that. So very interesting, totally interesting time to learn about all this stuff. My first access to high-end digital displays, though, because these were still CRTs, cathode ray tubes back then, analog video in and out. It came at Philips Electronics. And this was in 1999 when we were working on, and by the way, I was working there for the Y2K switch. So 99 and 2000. We were working on analog to digital flat panel displays. So you could plug in your classic HD15, high density 15 RGB cable from your computer video card, plug it into your digital flat panel display, and display your computer stuff. We still had all those VESA timings to worry about. So back in these early days, you would have the auto adjust button or menu item, and it would try to figure out what the timings were of the incoming signal, and every once in a while it would be wrong, and your desktop would be all weird, and the image would be shifted or jaggedy or whatever, not right. Hit that auto adjust. So they were still analog, but they were digital panels. They were 6-bit panels back then. Nobody was really making 8-bit panels. Your normal display and a CRT, for the most part, could come pretty close to displaying 8-bit pixel resolution on color. So you can get the full 16 million colors, 16.7 million, I think it is. So 6-bit, you would not have the quite the color range. So that was not ideal, but the whole idea was to introduce digital panels to the market so they could establish it. It was not necessarily exciting. It was interesting to be around the technology. The actual projects we were working on were kind of boring, but this was around the time when the first home LCD television entered the market, made by Philips. I actually saw one on display at Fry's Electronics in, where were we? I think it was the Sunnyvale store, but I think it was, I think it was the Sunnyvale store. It might have been the San Jose store. They're all gone anyway now, so it doesn't matter. But I saw it on display with the price tag near it. It was like $14,999 for what I think was, it might have been a 32-inch diagonal. I did not look this up, and I don't remember. It was not 40-inch. I don't think it was 40-inch diagonal. It appeared to be a 16 by 9-ish ratio, so it was not a square. It was definitely a rectangular landscape orientation monitor. If you were to try to buy that today, brand new, still in the box from Philips, if they had it listed as an item to sell, they probably could get $50 to $75 brand new. If that, it was not a great, amazing display. You can get some pretty amazing stuff for $100, $200. $15,000, you're probably getting a Philips display from today. No, there was some pretty amazing Bank, I think it is, Bank, B-A-N-Q, B-I-N-Q, Bank. Make some pretty high-end color-accurate monitors. Barco, I think, still is in the game. They were big with analog displays that were overpriced and maybe color-accurate. So color-accurate displays are useful for all the things I talked about already. So you know the color you're seeing is the color that it should be. But at the time, Philips and the world were looking eagerly at LCD, liquid crystal display, and other flat display tech to get away from the sealed bottles of vacuum and all the metals they require and whatnot. The cathode ray tubes are horrible. They are awful. They generate a lot of e-waste, so if you can recycle them, you can recover a lot of these metals, but they're generally they're not environmentally friendly in general across the board. And so yeah, it's good that they're gone. They're also a pain to move. So flat displays, game changers. What about digital cameras? So my first exposure to a real live digital camera, and you see what I did there, right, was at Apple. The second time I worked there, when one of my colleagues there in the Newton group had a brand new Casio pocket digital camera, able to take maybe 320 by 240. Maybe that's a quarter of a classic television size pic at 640 by 480 with reasonable color. And I don't remember how. I was probably storing them on compact flash or something, or maybe internal memory that you had to take off with a serial cable, probably, or probably a proprietary serial cable. I don't remember the details. Or I think it could maybe capture very brief QuickTime video clips. So remember QuickTime file containers, the compression was whatever. In the old days, people thought the QuickTime video was what you called the little thumbnails, 160 by 160 square, or maybe 160 by 120 for 4 by 3. You could pixel double to get it back up to a bigger size, but it would look like just ridiculously bad. It was not great, but it was new, and this was around 1996. I left True Vision to go work in the Newton Group, so it was right around that same time. By 1999 or so, we were building digital desktop monitors with a predictable color profile. This was at Philips, which fit nicely into those digital color workflows with color profiles and color accurate outputs to printers and all kinds of other cool things. What you ended up with was because the gels, just like we were using back in our failed attempts to do color scanning on a black and white scanner, but that is what you could use, is to divide the image up into these color channels. So you had these gels, effectively gels, on the front of an LCD panel, and so the red pixel would shine light through a red gel. It's not quite that grossly simple, but same idea. So you're shining light through a red gel, and the liquid crystal, the twisted pneumatic, what was it called? TN displays, twisted pneumatic, or thin film transistors were a little bit more complicated to control the twisted pneumatic. But you would rotate the liquid crystal, and you'd have polarized light coming in from the back, and then the perpendicular polarization on the front where the gel was. So the color would have this polarized light filter, and so the polarized light would be leaving the back, and it would have to rotate to make it through the front filter. So the twisted pneumatic, am I saying that right? It's TN. It's not PN. It's not, anyway. The crystal would have to rotate through 90 degrees. And I think later advancements, it would have a 270 degree rotation. So you get a little bit finer in the rotation, the number of degrees per, or radians if you like. But then eventually they were subject to a lot of noise. So they would not rotate very quickly, and they might not rotate the correct amount. So they were very sensitive and a little finicky. So TFT, thin film transistors, were applied to control much more accurately the rows and columns, the drivers that would decide how much to rotate each of the little rotating liquid crystal cells to control. They called it light valve technologies. So it would control how much light made it through the front polarizer, through the gel, and so you'd light up that red subpixel. You could light up RGB, and later they would come out with RGGB, so twice as much green, because we don't see green as well. Why is that? Because the world is green. There's so much green in the world, your eye doesn't really need to have the same sensitivity to it. So from a computer display perspective, you gotta deal with that. So there are all kinds of little subtleties about digital imaging. The gels would be a constant color, but you'd have to worry about the range of the pixel of each individual subpixel. And again, I told you earlier, the 6-bit pixels meant you had a smaller range for each of the channels. Normally you'd have 8-bit, and later there'd be 10-bit. You could probably go higher than that. So you get very, very fine adjustment between all of the different channel values. So you could determine how much red, green, and blue to inject into your visual field of view. And the way the human eye works on its own is fascinating, and that's not somewhere in my purview expertise, so I won't even go into that. But someday look into how your eye perceives color and high resolution by moving your eye around and rebuilding images, and it's crazy. Absolutely crazy. But you could approximate a color accurate image because you knew, or a display, because you knew the gel values, and they were pretty much constant. So you could do a quick calibration. Oh no, computer stop. I really gotta turn that thing off when we're recording. So yeah, you could have a reasonably color accurate display. So does this address the main reason people return things? Almost. I think that has fallen by the wayside over many, many years because color has just improved vastly. Color capture, color profiling, color workflows to make sure that your images are reasonably accurate. Most people don't really concern themselves too much with that level of production personally. So you're not too worried about color profiling your personal streaming cameras, your webcam, and your mobile device. But from a advertising and catalog creation and product advertising, marketing, and so on, I think they got that all worked out, and I think people are reasonably happy with what they see. But really, you have to be, if you're going to build a color accurate, universe, the ambient lighting and the device you're displaying on, they're all over the place. So you just make a best guess and you hope for the best. And I don't think people even worry about it anymore. So where am I? So digital cameras, yeah, by 1999, you go workflows, cool things. By the time I returned to Silicon Valley, it was my second tour in 2005, video capture cards to grab clips from analog television were reasonably cheap. So the Target 2000 board I was working on at TrueVision, I was working on the software for that, was pretty expensive. I don't even remember what the price was, but it was not something you would just say, hey, maybe I'll just get one. It was really built for prosumer, professional consumers, people that were garage video editors. There were plenty. And so now you could capture NTSC video or record from a videotape with a capture board that you could drop into any computer. It probably cost about $100. And more people had mobile phones in their pockets at this time. And I think cameras were becoming commonplace in mobile devices. I will say that when I took my break from Silicon Valley from 2000 to 2005, when I worked at Intel as a silicon validation hardware engineer, not hardware, but we were validating hardware. It was emulated hardware, so it didn't even exist yet. It was the Hermone B0 stepping. It was an ARM part and destined for cell phones. Part of the components that it included were a color space converter and various other facilities for hardware, static, single image, and video moving, multiple image capture and processing, and so on. So these things were happening, and so I don't know what the penetration of the market was for camera-enabled cell phones. They were certainly available, and I don't know how many. I think the iPhone launched in, I should know this, was it 2000? Was it 2004? No, it had to be 2006, 7, somewhere in there. So the parts were becoming available if they weren't already. So the cell phone was coming around and having a camera in it and all this stuff. So this was in that time frame. The precise dates, it was somewhere in the mid 2000 to 2010 area, somewhere in there. Video for everybody, though. At TrueVision, we were building products that would go into professional video editing bays at Avid, later Pinnacle. I think Avid bought TrueVision. I think Pinnacle bought Avid. And they were using Betacam, remember that? Tape decks, and NTSC overscan with 720 by 480, or maybe CCOM or PAL, 29.97. Why did I write 29.96? Don't know. 29.97 NTSC frame rate, or 25 for PAL, or whatever is needed. And we could all do all of those. All the products around them would basically support all these video standards. It was not too difficult to change the scan rates. Motion JPEG was the state of the art, except that I think it was IBM and maybe C-Cube at the time that were rolling out hardware devices that could compress intra-frame video in real time without dropping frames. And those would fit into the Target 2000 board because it had an extensible codec board. So you could pop off the Motion JPEG hardware and pop on the MPEG hardware. And I want to say they had an early prototype for electrical sort of compatibility check and whatnot when I was still there, but I departed to go work for Apple before I ever saw any real MPEG happening. And I can't say that I missed much because it was happening either way. And you can see all of that stuff evolving over time. While I was still at TrueVision, though, we were pulling in as many quality pixels as possible on the leading edge Apple Macintosh Quadra 840 AV, stands for audio video, which had real Texas Instruments specified new bus. So they correctly implemented burst and block transfers, which was not true of any other Macintosh product. So you could do full bandwidth. You could take the full bandwidth of the bus with our Target 2000 new bus board and move those overscan frames with Motion JPEG over to your disk. We had an ATTO, SCSI 3 adapter board for SCSI 3 hard drive array. In the good old days, in order to keep up with most video, and not even the overscan stuff, even normal NTSC, 640 by 480 plus alpha, so 32 bits per pixel, so a 32-bit word moving over the new bus. 640 times 480, so times 32 bits, and 29.97 frames per second. That's almost 60 fields per second. That's the norm 29.97 includes a drop frame per the NTSC standard, and it also you always have to worry about, because you can also drop a field. You may get two. You can call them even for fields because it's interlaced and all that. So 60 feet. Did I say frames? 60 fields per second, because everything was interlaced, because it was the only way to get near the 60 hertz update rate, which is basically what the human eye wants to see, is a 60 hertz refresh rate. Coincidentally matches the wall current AC frequency, 60 hertz, very popular. With a cathode ray tube showering that refresh line. Showing. Did I write showering it with electrons? That's what was happening. Showing that refresh line if you pointed your video camera at your television and you were not using Genlock, which was essential for anyone making content like filming movies or video. If you're filming movies, it was really hard to avoid the scan line. So you would see in classic movies, you'll see a rolling kind of weird thing moving probably up the screen. It's because you're not recording. You're recording film at 24 frames per second. The monitors would display at 29.97 frames per second, so you'd get the scan line visible, like the wagon wheel problem in Westerns of the old days. So Genlock was a way to record digital video and have it synchronized or locked with the displays that would appear in the frame. If they were still old school analog displays, and you would not get that. You would synchronize the display timing of the analog displays with the camera. Pretty cool. In order to capture that data that fast without dropping frames, which is, for any level of prosumer or professional video, complete non-starter. If you're dropping frames, you are not going to be on that person's desk. We were dumping these fields, so interlace fields, 60 fields, 30 frames per second. We were dumping them as fast as possible to the fastest SCSI 3 drives we could find, attached to the fastest SCSI 3 interfaces. So that was, I want to say it was Seagate Barracuda dual head drives. And I want to say it was, and again, well, I do know it was the Atto SCSI 3 interface for the Mac. So fast as we could find in 6-disc RAID 0 striped arrays. This was barely enough. We were barely able to capture long video streams without dropping frames. So this is 6 hard drives. They were probably 7,200 RPM or so, give or take. SCSI 3 hard drives with dual read-write heads moving across them in a little stack. 6 drives, all those lights blinking. So every time you wrote data, it wrote it across 6 drives. Why only 6? Because that's the only enclosure we could find that was reasonable to use without going nuts. So we had a 6-drive array. We eventually wanted people to use this, so you couldn't really get people to stack 35 drives. And today you could, but back then, yeah, that was our target configuration. So 6 drives, RAID 0 stripe, and you could get away with capturing video for periods of time. If you could get away with doing it in small chunks, like 15 minutes, probably better. It's barely enough. That all this still gives me pause, though, to this day, that normal people are walking around with 4K high dynamic range computed imaging devices capable of saving video to their flash memory at full rate, and who knows how many hours of it, and then uploading it all with cell data at almost full rate. If you're doing streaming at 4K, you got to have the best connection you can find, and you're probably still going to drop frames. Surely high def at 1920 by 1080, progressive, so no, those are actual full frames, is a piece of cake under most circumstances for streaming. So if you got a streamer wandering up and down the Vegas Strip, they're probably streaming at 1080 by, at 1080 HD to 1080, I think it is, right? So that's the number of scan lines. 1920 across, 1080 vertical. So by comparison, that's really not that much. But from the old days, it's a vast increase in video quality. You're sending real color values too. You're not doing 6-bit ridiculous. You're not doing YUV 442 or anything like that. You're doing fully high dynamic range sampled image data, 1920 by 1080, 60. Crazy, just crazy. So yeah, like I said, I literally reflect on this It doesn't keep me up at night, but every once in a while, I think it just boggles the mind. And people don't even think about it right now. You ask anyone, anywhere, do you know what's happening when you take that picture? And it's like, well, the computing high dynamic range stuff on the iPhone and Samsung and Google, that they're doing some crazy stuff with imaging in general. But just the stuff that goes on to I'm capturing 4K video and I'm going to upload it to YouTube, and just would not have been in any science fiction potential transition to science fact in anybody's mind as we were sitting in a lab trying to get NTSC. By the way, NTSC usually stands for never the same color. Yeah, because color accuracy was so awful. Noisy signals, again, built for black and white legacy television display, adding the luminance. Adding the I think I've been confusing these back and forth. Chrominance, black and white, luminance, color. So you'd have the brightness value, the chrominance. I'm sorry, the luminance. What did I've reversed them again. Chrominance, color. That's what it stands for. Chrome. Luminance, brightness, like lumens, like light. So if I've flipped and flopped on those, whatever, I'm getting tired. Getting tired of hearing myself. But yeah, all of these workarounds, when the HD standard, when standard resolutions, which took a lot of arguing, by the way, when standard resolutions that would make international displays interoperable, no longer did you have to worry about PAL versus NTSC, no longer did you have to worry about scan rates that were different and resampling 25 for PAL and 29.97, basically 30 for US. They're really close. So, it was a pain. Yeah, they have factors of 5 in common. So, but you're basically, you got to do some shenanigans to get the 25 to go nicely at 30 and vice versa. And then when you're upscaling or downscaling and all, your quality just goes out the window. And especially if you're adjusting that Q factor for your motion JPEG back in our day. So a ton of things have lined up to make all this stuff work. You're not displaying all this stuff on CRTs anymore, which is wonderful. We'd never be quite certain what you were going to see on your NTSC display. Remember, never the same color. The phosphors on your television would age, and images would sometimes burn in. If you left your TV on with like a time or channel number displayed, it could burn that in, and you'd always have like 03 on the bottom or something like this. Sometimes the CRT, not the time, probably it changed frequently enough, but sometimes the CRT would require some degaussing to avoid errant beam deflections. They were not great, and they were hot, and they were a pain to manufacture and recycle. In short, and I forgot the H, in short, even early LCD technology blew CRT out of the water. The stuff we were working on with the 6-bit color and all that, they've only improved with higher scan rates. You can get 120, 140. Can you get 160 at 160 hertz? The original 60 hertz was. Those are easy, and most monitors are probably defaulting to that, and most video cards are fine with that, and the human eye is fine with that. Quicker pixel transition rates to avoid ghost images, so you don't get like motion blur, as they call it. So if an object, if your cursor or something in a video that you're watching is moving on the screen, you might see like a trail as the pixels try to keep up with the transition of colors. If you're going from a black pixel to a white pixel, that's a lot of motion very quickly. So you'd get this sort of gray blur between the two. So refresh rates have hit something under 4 milliseconds, I think, which is good. It used to be much longer. And in-plane switching, IPS monitors have been a great way to get around what's called grayscale inversion. If you remember the old days of liquid crystal displays, if you looked at them from a side, from an off-axis viewing angle, it would look like you're looking at a negative image, because you're quite literally looking at the sides, the light that's reflected from the TN subpixel. So the person looking at the front of the display is seeing the proper color because the light is coming at them. But if you look from the side, and you're talking back in the old days, it could be like 30 or 45 degrees off angle. Later it would be more like 80 degrees. So you get better and better at this, but you're basically looking at the light reflecting off of the TN liquid crystal. So you're seeing the light that's not getting to the viewer, so you'd be getting the negative. So it would look like a negative image. So grayscale inversion. Pretty neat. It was pretty neat, but it was not what the customers would want, so it had to be fixed. So in-plane switching gets rid of that. Eventually, you'd get the OLED displays, the organic light-emitting diodes. You have individual little organic light bulbs that are mounted in a grid, and now you can emit light. So an LCD, an IPS. These are transmissive displays, and they use light valve technology or similar. An OLED display, sort of like plasma displays of old, are emissive, so they actually emit light. They're not controlling a backlight. They're actually emitting light. You run into some age problems. You can also get burn-in, but I think those problems have been solved, and you get much more control, a much brighter image. It turns out for LCD liquid crystal display with the light valves, you're throwing away something like 95% of the light because of the polarization. You're reflecting it back into the display or wherever it ends up, where the socks go from your dryer, same place. So most of the light that was coming from the backlight, going through the polarizer, going through the TN crystal, then through another polarizer, then through a gel, you're only getting like 5%, I think it was 6%, something under 10% of the actual light to your eyeball, which is crazy when you think about it. Nowadays, you get AMOLED and stuff. You're getting pretty much emissive displays in mobile devices, vastly superior as far as dynamic range and as far as response times and refresh rates and so on. You can get 120. You don't even see motion blur anymore. It's crazy. And you can upscale and downscale images now because of the nice digital content, digital source material, ultra wide and even ultra tall displays aimed at computer users. So you can scale images. You can have multiple display sources and merge them onto the screen. So you can have like a double wide monitor can have two computers, and you can have two displays in one. These are all things that would have been unthinkable. We had video walls of analog monitors, and TrueVision, where I was working, had acquired Raster Ops, which was famous for having I think they could do 16 monitors. So one video card would drive a video wall of 16, call it 21 inch or something, CRTs. So you'd have a nice wall of analog monitors, and they could have an image that was joined across all of them, and you could, nice for marketing, sort of. Image sensors have grown up as well, able to capture wide dynamic range, moving from tubes back in the day when they had those giant cameras that they'd have to wheel across your studio floors back in the very early days. They're using big giant tubes, and they would overheat, and they had to keep them cool to charge a couple devices, CCD, that you would find in your big cameras that you'd have on your shoulder. Those hung around into the more modern times, and then eventually CMOS, complementary metal oxide semiconductor displays, which were much faster and probably still are. And then whatever magic is happening now, I have no idea. I almost don't want to know. I think you have to. It's like opening up the Ark at the end of Indiana Jones. You're not supposed to know that stuff. Huge pixel counts and the range. The range that enables a solid input to the latest in computed photography. So now you're able to get tons and tons of pixels that have a large color gamut. They're sensitive to a huge fraction of of light, maybe even some invisible light. Some cameras have experimented with doing IR capture. I think you actually, let me amend that. You can capture infrared. If you are curious, if you ever have your cell phone handy and someone near you has a remote for the old school remote, like infrared remote, if they point the infrared remote at your camera and they hit a button, you will see the light. It will look kind of greenish, I think it is, because your camera will shift that infrared light into visible range. So you can actually see infrared light to some degree on your camera. Now, obviously, it doesn't want a lot of infrared light because that will throw off your visible light imagery. So there's some computational magic going on there, but you can see, quote unquote, see in the infrared range with your cell phone camera or digital cameras in general. They are capable of picking that up, but you can probably pick up even wider range if they don't filter it out. So you can upscale and downscale when you have good image input. So if you have these really nice sensors, now you want to display a downsized image on your phone, or nowadays phone displays are probably full size, but now you want to like double the size display on a 4K monitor. Totally doable because you have really, really good captured information. You may have even captured it in 4K. So yeah, the CMOS and whatever magic is happening now, it boggles the mind. And these are saved off to those same flash drives that can save incoming high def and sometimes 4K video, or maybe just the 2K. High def is essentially 2K. It depends on your device. Maybe nowadays everybody can do 4K. I don't even know. It's again, but I'm too awestruck to even do the math. All the stuff of fantasy while we were struggling to get those tiny analog TV fields onto disk without losing them. Just crazy. So a field, because they were interlaced, a field was 640 wide by 240 tall. So you get the even lines on one field, and then the next field you get the odd lines. So you'd have 640 by 280. I'm sorry, 640 by 240. Is that what I said earlier? And then so you'd combine the 240 odd and even fields, and you get a frame of 640 by 480. Production by street. Somebody needs a new muffler, maybe. So yeah, maybe phones nowadays can all do 4K. That's probably true. Maybe they can all do 8K at this point. And by the way, do you need an 8K display? No, but 8K cameras are interesting because once you have 8K, then you can move around within your captured images, and you can pan around for a 4K rectangle that you want to display. So you can do some creative editing with any images. So if you can capture an 8K image, you probably have a shot that you can use. If you're only capturing an HD, like 2K, like 1080, 1920 by 1080, you got to use all that frame, right? So if you're going to render to an HD video or 4K video and you have 8K on your input, you can be more creative with what you choose to include in the frame. Pretty neat. These are unheard. If it was 1996 and we were talking about 8K frames at full data rate, storing to non-moving storage devices and then transmitting them over radio networks live, probably not true of 8K, but certainly HD, they would have wondered what we were doing in our meetings. The fact that we are carrying all this stuff around in our pockets, available often on monthly subscriptions or other similar plans, not tens of thousands of dollars for this hardware rig, to all comers, anybody who wants one can. It's very obviously changed the game when it comes to personal media consumption. Of course, when I was working at Philips, by the way, part of their overall plan with flat displays and so on was to enable the digital living room, I think they called it, which was built around family viewing, around everybody's watching the same program on a big flat Philips television. They totally nailed it, obviously. And of course, the sharing and ridiculous oversharing of all manner of intimate and silly and important moments for the world to see, all made possible because of this ridiculously high quality imaging workflow that we all have. Great camera, great image processing, easy high quality storage that can take as much data as you can throw at it. You can edit images on a touch screen now. No need to become an expert at Adobe Premiere and other video editing and the Avid, whatever it was. I can't remember what it was called. Avid, I can't remember. Or now it's DaVinci and all this stuff. All these tools, you don't really need them. Your phone can do a lot of this work for you. You end up with a really high quality output. You can watch it on your screen on your phone. You can send it to your friend. You can post it on any number of horrible social media websites. You can combine it with your own video and edit it down to some other duet or whatever your platform calls it. When you re-edit some of none of this stuff was even in the realm of imagination of us lowly workers trying to just get the stuff that we had to work. So that's crazy. Honestly, at Philips at the time when I was working there was also making I think they were making 1 million screens per week, and that was not enough for the super popular Nokia 6100 devices. I had one. I had the 6190 American GSM 900. No, 1900. GSM 1900. So I had a 6190 back when T-Mobile was Singular, I think it was. VoiceStream or Singular, one of those, back in the old days. And so Philips was making those displays, and they couldn't keep up with the demand, and that's nothing nowadays. And these were only little tiny liquid crystal displays. They had some cool ones, transmissive, but there was there was reflective, and they all look kind of cool. But these were all little, like, 1-inch square, approximately 1-inch square displays that were just monochrome. There was no color, no grayscale, no nothing. It was pretty much like a digital watch. And this is back when we can laugh now. Back when the people from the Eindhoven office of Philips, they'd be in America, and they were saying, oh, people sit in a coffee shop and they send each other text messages on these phones. That's become the way people communicate. And we found it shockingly ridiculous. Ridiculous? People in Europe were texting, I'm going to text someone that's sitting 1 foot away from me. And that is how people would converse. And we thought that was insane. And we have far surpassed that level of insanity. If insane is the right word. I'm not trying to be mean, but it is. It's a little weird. We really did not see this coming from our view in our cubicles at the time. So the point of this entire story, this entire tale, this walk down memory lane, of which I have very few pictures, by the way, somewhat ironically, the little tweakage of the editor here, and I think I entered this transitional period where we were going from full analog on the input and the output. We were sticking a computer between it, so let's digitize, try to capture some of this data to a hard drive, try to be able to edit it. That's where I became a very amateurish video editor to learn all this stuff. Got me a trip to Japan, my first trip out of the country, to work on a digital video, DV Pro video editing platform that Sony was developing for live sporting event capture in like a video van, right? So a portable editing station. They could have it in the van with the satellite uplink at a sporting event, probably baseball, and edit images before they sent them up. So entitling and other such things. So they could do their video production full digital in the van and then uplink through satellite. So we worked on that in Japan. Spent a week. It was good times. I've talked about this in a previous episode. But just to be able to witness this transition from what is essentially stone tools to CNC, high precision, works with any materials, build anything, error-free, super high tolerance. I mean, it is such a vast, it's like going from horse-drawn buggy to self-driving cars, right? Same sort of level of transitional technology, revolution, really. And so, yeah, I'm still kind of amazed. I mean, I use a digital camera now and then, and in my phone, like most people do. I think I own a digital camera somewhere, a pocket point-and-shoot camera. Still takes better pictures, but it's way too close now to even really think about it. I mean, I probably spoke too soon. My point-and-shoot camera, if I were to find it, I would say, it takes pictures about as good, maybe slightly better, depending on the lighting. So there's all kinds of stuff. But really, really, what everybody has in their pocket now is so vastly superior, both in image capture, display, transmission, storage. So not both, but all of those things. So vastly superior to what we were working with in as recently as 1996, 98, 2000. The display you have on your computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop machine or even on the phone itself. So we're 25 years, say 25 to 30-ish years of amazing stuff. And most of the stuff has been amazing for at least a decade. So a lot of this stuff was becoming apparent 2010, 2015. What will the future hold? As if you watch the news, I'm not going to put any links to this, but Sora, the ChatGPT AI video generator, photorealistic video, has been released to the world. Apparently it's already stirring up some controversy. That's today. And as, what's his name? Philip DeFranco. I caught a video and he said, of the Sora launch, he said precisely this, and he's absolutely correct. And it fits into the theme of today's episode. And I will end with this. So I'll thank you for listening again. As always, don't forget to check out my buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page. Don't forget that right at the top of the profile, there's a link in the text. There's a link to the posts section. You can listen to the Buy Me an Update. I try to get those out Monday mornings, about 5 minutes. You can listen to that. Visit the Ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Philip DeFranco said exactly this. Remember, especially if you look at a Sora video, today, whichever day you're looking at anything, today is the worst that technology is ever going to be, because tomorrow it's going to be better. And it's only going to be better the day after. So whatever you look at any given time, it's the worst version of what it's going to turn into. And I think about that in the context of what I've talked about today. I can't even imagine. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.